My name is Ramona Roberts. I am 32 years old. You are not coming to the wedding. That was the text that changed the trajectory of my entire family. It arrived at 10:14 on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Salt Lake City, reviewing a quarterly supply chain report. My phone screen lit up next to my coffee mug. The message was from my mother, Helen. I picked it up and read the second line. "This family does not want you there," my father, Richard, typed next. The little gray bubbles danced on the screen for 3 seconds before his message landed. "You make us look low class just by being there." I set the phone face down on the polished wood of my desk. The HVAC vent above me hummed a steady, low note. My hands did not shake. I did not cry. I did not type back a desperate apology begging for my seat at the table. I just stared at the mountain peaks visible through my office window. For 14 months, I had functioned as the silent underwriter for my younger sister Lexi and her fairy tale Park City wedding to the heir of a local real estate empire. My master spreadsheet held the exact running total, $64,200. My money, my credit cards, my name on every single vendor contract. And now, 48 days before the ceremony, I was too low class to attend the event I bought. If you have ever been the scapegoat who pays the bills while the golden child gets all the glory, I need you to listen to this. Drop a comment and tell me your age and where you are watching from. Welcome to Olivia Stories Revenge, where we learn that toxic families only respect boundaries when they carry a financial penalty. Hit subscribe, because the math on this one is going to balance out in a way nobody saw coming. My parents wanted to project old money to Lexi's future in-laws, the Sterlings. A divorced procurement director, who actually works for her paycheck, did not fit the country club aesthetic. They thought I would quietly accept my erasure, the way I always had, just to keep the peace. They forgot what I do for a living. I negotiate corporate acquisitions. I mitigate vendor risk. I manage assets. I picked up my phone and typed 9 words. "So you are choosing status over blood." I hit send. I watched the read receipt appear at the bottom of the screen. Then I opened a new tab on my monitor. I logged into the master vendor portal for the luxury resort. The interface loaded, displaying the remaining balance zeroed out by my own checking account. I navigated to the reservation management tab. I selected Cancel Services. A red warning prompt appeared asking if I understood that the $25,000 venue deposit was non-refundable. I did not hesitate. I clicked Confirm. The screen refreshed. Event canceled. I closed the laptop. That was just the first domino to fall, and the caterer was about to learn a very hard lesson about who actually pays the bills. Before I tell you what the venue coordinator said when I made that call, please take a second to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is. I love reading your responses. To understand the true math of this disaster, you have to understand the specific dynamic operating inside the Roberts family. My sister Lexi is 25 years old. She spent her entire adolescence wearing satin sashes and walking across stages in local beauty pageants. She learned very early in life that tilting her chin and smiling at the precise right angle could get her whatever she desired. She was the golden child. And she was marrying Tyler Sterling. Tyler was not just a guy she met at a downtown bar. He was the sole heir to an old money Utah real estate empire. His family possessed the kind of generational wealth that does not need to shout. They owned valleys. They owned commercial districts. They practically owned the town. My mother, Helen, viewed this upcoming marriage not as a celebration of young love, but as a highly strategic corporate merger. She desperately wanted the Sterling family to believe we were their financial equals. We were nowhere close to their tax bracket. My father, Richard, was a retired middle manager who spent 3 decades pushing paper for a regional logistics firm. He earned a modest pension. Helen had not held a paying job since 1995. She spent her days managing the household image and volunteering for committees that offered high visibility and zero salary. The facade of affluence was her full-time occupation. I was the anomaly in the Roberts household. I was the older daughter who bypassed the pageant circuit, went to a state university, studied finance, and climbed the corporate ladder. I held the only actual liquid capital in our bloodline. For the better part of a decade, I operated as their silent backer. When Lexi blew the transmission on her imported SUV during her junior year of college, I wrote the check to the mechanic so Richard would not have to dip into his retirement savings. When Helen and Richard faced imminent expulsion from the local country club because their annual dues were 4 months in arrears, I discreetly wired the funds to the membership director. I paid for the privilege of keeping their social standing intact. I did not just hand over the cash blindly. I tracked every single penny. I kept a detailed spreadsheet hidden on my personal hard drive. It was a habit born of strict self-preservation. Column A contained the date. Column B held the vendor name. Column C listed the exact dollar amount. Every catering installment logged. Every string quartet deposit dated. Every floral arrangement invoice saved as a digital file. I functioned beautifully as their private bank, yet I was a source of profound embarrassment as a daughter. My tailored suits, my pragmatic mindset, and my recent divorce did not mesh with the country club aesthetic Helen meticulously curated. I was useful for funding the lifestyle, but I was too rough around the edges to be showcased within it. When Lexi brought Tyler home for the first time, Helen went into overdrive. The wedding planning commenced before the engagement ring was even sized to fit Lexi's finger. Helen sat me down in her pristine living room. The room smelled like lemon polish and expensive linen. She pitched the wedding expenses to me like a seasoned broker. She called it a critical family investment. She looked me right in the eye and said we needed to put our best foot forward to ensure Lexi secured her future with the Sterlings. She told me the initial costs would yield a lifetime of security for my sister. I agreed to handle the vendor contracts. As a procurement director, negotiating favorable terms and securing high-level services is quite literally my profession. I reviewed the portfolios. I negotiated the luxury resort in Park City. I secured the elite catering team. I managed the complex timelines. I poured $64,200 into an event designed to impress people I barely knew. I bought the illusion my mother so desperately wanted to sell to Tyler's parents. And my ultimate reward was a text message telling me my divorced, working-class aura would tarnish the pristine image they were projecting. They wanted my capital, but they demanded my absence. The morning after the disinvitation, the conflict began to escalate. But it escalated with a profound quiet. I woke up at my usual time, 6 a.m. I walked into my kitchen and brewed a pot of dark roast coffee. The house was still. The sun was just starting to crest over the Wasatch Mountains, painting the sky a pale shade of purple. I did not receive any frantic calls from my father begging me to reconsider. I did not wake up to tearful apologies from Lexi. They assumed I had accepted my fate. They assumed the Bank of Ramona would remain open even if the doors to the venue were firmly locked against me. They thought my silence was submission. I took a long shower. I put on a navy blue pencil skirt and a crisp white blouse, the armor of my trade. I drove to the office listening to the morning financial news. I took my regular reserved parking spot in the underground garage. I rode the elevator to the 14th floor. I greeted my assistant. I sat at my ergonomic desk, sipped my black coffee, and watched the second hand on the large wall clock sweep past the numbers. I knew the vendors would open their corporate offices at 9 a.m. I knew the automated cancellation emails from the resort portal would land in their respective inboxes shortly after. I just had to wait for the ripples to reach the shore. In procurement, you learn that the most dangerous moments are not the loud negotiations. The real danger happens in the quiet pauses just before a major contract defaults. I reviewed a supply chain logistics report for a client in Seattle. I signed off on a steel purchase order. I kept my phone face up on the desk. The screen remained dark for the first hour. Helen was likely sipping her morning tea, oblivious to the fact that her meticulously planned societal debut was currently disintegrating in cyberspace. I drank another sip of coffee. The warmth settled in my chest. At 10:14 in the morning, the silence finally broke. My direct office line began to ring. The caller ID displayed a Park City area code. It was not my mother realizing her mistake. It was the executive chef of the luxury catering company, the one who charged $200 a plate for herb-crusted lamb and truffle risotto. I answered the phone with my standard professional greeting. The chef was in a state of sheer panic. His voice echoed through the receiver with a frantic edge. He informed me that the credit card on file, the one Helen had just tried to use to process a sudden $15,000 final payment, had been declined. He said the card was frozen. The first gear of my mother's elaborate machine had just snapped, and she had no idea the mechanic was the one who cut the brake lines. The caterer was an elite Park City executive chef named Julian. He curated bespoke menus featuring locally sourced venison and wild-caught salmon. He charged $200 a plate, and his affluent clientele rarely questioned the invoice. Julian did not specialize in bounce transactions. He was panicking. His voice vibrated through my office phone with a frantic, clipped rhythm. He sounded like a man watching a grease fire spread toward a dining room full of guests. "Ms. Roberts," he breathed into the receiver, "your mother just contacted my office. She tried to shift the final $15,000 payment to a different credit card. The transaction declined. Now she is demanding we waive the deposit penalty and proceed with the ordering schedule." I understood immediately what had transpired. Helen must have received an automated alert regarding the venue cancellation early that morning. Instead of confronting me or offering a shred of an apology, her first instinct was to circumvent my authority. She tried to salvage the remaining high-ticket vendors by throwing her own plastic at the problem. She likely used the joint account she shared with my father, a checking account attached to a modest logistics pension that could never absorb a sudden 5-figure luxury catering charge. It bounced. Now she was demanding Julian bend his strict corporate policies and proceed with the menu prep on blind faith. I smiled into the phone. The polished wood of my desk reflected the faint winter sunlight pouring through the glass. The first major layer of conflict had officially breached the surface. I maintained a highly professional tone. I utilized the exact octave I use when a global supplier fails to meet a quarterly manufacturing quota. I instructed Julian to open the digital master service agreement we signed 6 months prior. I directed his attention to the financial authorization clause buried in Section 4. I calmly informed the chef that I was the sole signee on that contract. My signature held the exclusive power to authorize funds. I told him I was officially withdrawing my financial backing. The legal document explicitly stated that without my direct authorization, the event was null and void. Julian exhaled a sharp, jagged breath. He mentioned his rigorous ordering schedule and the specialty imported ingredients already in transit from the coast. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for the man. He was collateral damage in a fierce family war. I told him he was free to draft a brand new contract with Helen if she could produce $15,000 in certified funds by the end of the business day. We both knew she could not produce 15,000 cents. I thanked him for his time and ended the call. Helen possessed a truly remarkable relationship with financial reality. She treated debt like a minor weather event that would simply pass over her house and strike someone else. Years ago, when my father Richard faced early retirement and dwindling investments, Helen refused to alter her spending habits. She continued purchasing imported skincare and hosting lavish luncheons for her social circle. She believed a savior would always arrive to sweep away the financial debris. I became that designated sweeper the moment I earned my first corporate bonus. She resented my career because it highlighted my independence, but she greedily harvested the fruits of my labor. The caterer incident was vintage Helen. Ignore the structural collapse and try to paint over the cracks with a maxed-out credit card. I spent the next hour reviewing a complex logistics spreadsheet for a client in Seattle. I approved a massive steel purchase order. I kept my phone face up on the right corner of my desk. The screen remained dark. I knew the gears were turning in the affluent suburbs of Salt Lake City. I knew Helen was currently experiencing the terrifying realization that her societal debut was disintegrating. The Bank of Ramona was closed. At exactly 11:30, the screen illuminated. My cell phone vibrated against the desk. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times. I observed the rhythmic pattern of the vibration. I picked up the device and pressed it to my ear. "Ramona, sweetie." Her voice flowed through the speaker, smooth and frictionless. She did not sound angry. She sounded perfectly pleasant. She deployed that sweet, clipped tone she reserved for the neighborhood homeowners association meetings, the specific pitch she utilized to convince the local board to approve expensive new landscaping for the subdivision entrance. "There seems to be a tiny glitch with the caterer," she continued. A soft, artificial chuckle trailed her words. "Be a dear and call the bank to sort it out. I think their fraud department flagged the charge by mistake." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. Weaponized amnesia. It was her signature tactic. She was pretending the vicious text message from yesterday did not exist. She was erasing the fact that she had formally uninvited me to the wedding. She was ignoring my father calling me a low-class embarrassment. In her constructed reality, she had simply encountered a minor administrative bump. She expected her personal assistant to smooth the road. She needed the money to flow, so she simply rewrote the past 24 hours. I swiveled my ergonomic office chair toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The snow-capped peaks of the Wasatch Mountains stood stark and brilliant against the bright blue sky. They looked immovable. I felt immovable. I did not raise my voice. I did not inject an ounce of venom or dramatic flair into my response. I delivered the facts with the clinical precision of a ledger, balancing out to 0. "I am not coming to the wedding, Mom. Neither is my money." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the end call button. The line went dead. I placed the device back on the corner of the desk. The silence in my office felt heavy and rich. The initial shockwave had been detonated. I took a sip of my coffee. The liquid had cooled, but the taste was sharp and incredibly grounding. 2 minutes later, the phone began to ring. Helen. I watched the screen flash until a call went to voicemail. 10 seconds passed. It rang again. Then a text message arrived from Lexi. Then another call from my father. The digital onslaught commenced. The phone vibrated so intensely it began to inch across the polished wood of my desk. The panic had officially set in. The carefully constructed illusion of the Sterling merger was catching fire. They realized I was not playing a game. I was not throwing a tantrum to beg for my invitation back. I was executing a strategic and permanent withdrawal. But Helen was a woman who guarded her social standing with the ferocity of a cornered predator. She was not going to surrender her golden child's grand society wedding without a vicious fight. She realized phone calls from a distance would not break my resolve. The remote tactics had failed. She needed to close the distance. She was going to attack, and she was going to bring her pageant queen daughter to the battlefield. By 9 a.m. on Wednesday, the automated systems had executed their programming. The cascade of vendor warnings flooded my mother's email inbox in rapid succession. The high-end floral designer who was importing thousands of rare white orchids issued a formal suspension notice. The editorial photographer, a woman who frequently shot covers for national bridal magazines, sent a breach of contract alert. The digital infrastructure of the Park City wedding was dismantling itself piece by piece. I left my corporate building at noon for my scheduled lunch hour. I navigated 2 blocks down the street to an upscale espresso bar favored by downtown financial analysts and corporate attorneys. The space was sleek and minimalist, filled with the low hum of espresso machines and the hushed tones of high-level business negotiations. I secured a small marble bistro table in the corner. I opened a legal pad to review a complex supplier contract for a vendor out of state. The brass bell above the heavy glass door chimed. I did not look up immediately. I was deep in the clauses of a liability waiver. Then a distinct shadow fell across my yellow legal pad. Helen and Lexi stood towering over my small table. They had driven 40 minutes from their manicured suburban subdivision into the dense heart of the business district, specifically to corner me. Lexi wore a crisp white pleated tennis skirt and a matching sun visor. She did not play tennis. The outfit served as a uniform. It was a calculated visual cue signifying a life of affluent leisure and country club accessibility. She looked deeply distressed, clutching a luxury glass water bottle like a vital lifeline. Helen wore a sharply tailored navy blazer. She forcefully dropped her structured designer purse onto the center of my table. The heavy metal hardware of the bag cracked sharply against the marble surface. A few heads belonging to nearby executives turned in our direction. That noise was a strategic move. Helen frequently utilized public spaces for her confrontations. She relied on the intense societal pressure of a quiet, upscale environment to force her targets into rapid submission. She assumed I would instantly surrender to avoid a humiliating public spectacle. She misread her target. I operate in boardrooms where millions of dollars are debated daily. A scolding in a coffee shop barely registered on my pulse. "You are ruining your sister's life out of sheer jealousy." Helen hissed the words through clenched teeth. She kept her vocal register just low enough to evade the barista behind the counter, but the tone was sharp enough to slice straight through the ambient noise of the cafe. This was the fourth layer of conflict. Gaslighting in a public arena. She was attempting to rewrite the entire narrative in real time. In her newly revised script, my financial withdrawal possessed zero connection to her cruel text message. It was instead born from a spinster sibling's bitter envy. Lexi began to weep. It was a highly practiced theatrical display. Her slim shoulders shook rhythmically, but her expensive mascara remained perfectly intact. "The Sterlings are asking questions about the vendors, Ramona." She whimpered the sentence while looking around to see who might be watching her perform. Tyler's mother noticed the floral portal went offline this morning. What am I supposed to tell them? "Tell them you cannot afford orchids," I replied. My voice maintained the steady, clinical cadence of a quarterly fiscal review. Helen leaned closer to my face. Her signature perfume, an overwhelming wave of expensive synthetic jasmine, flooded my personal space. "You will reinstate those payments immediately." She jabbed a manicured finger toward my legal pad. "You are going to call the venue coordinator right now and fix this clerical error. You have a duty to this family. You do not get to humiliate us in front of Utah high society." Notice her specific vocabulary choices. Duty, clerical error, humiliate. She expertly framed my $64,000 capital injection as a fundamental biological obligation. My money was her inherent right. The cancellation was merely a clerical error to be rectified by the obedient bank of Ramona. I did not raise my voice to match her pitch. I did not flinch away from her pointing finger. I reached down to the leather briefcase resting by my feet. I unzipped the main compartment. I pulled out a neatly stapled packet of premium printer paper. It was a hard copy of the master vendor terms and conditions. I placed the dense legal document on the marble table directly next to her designer purse. I tapped the final signature line with my index finger. "I am the client." I stated the fact cleanly and clearly. I looked directly into Helen's eyes, holding her gaze without blinking. "You are merely the guests. You formally revoked my invitation to attend. Therefore, I formally revoked my event." The blood rapidly drained from Helen's face. Her complexion turned a stark, pale shade before flushing a furious, mottled red. The veins in her neck became visibly raised against her collar. The sudden realization that she held zero legal authority over any of the wedding contracts struck her core. She was a passenger, demanding to fly a plane she did not own. She leaned in so close I could see the fine tension lines forming around her mouth. The polite mask of the suburban socialite slipped away, revealing the desperate operator underneath. "If you do not fix this right now," she whispered, "I will call Evelyn Sterling myself. I will tell Tyler's parents that you are mentally unstable. I will tell them you are having a bitter breakdown over your own failed marriage and you are attempting to extort us for attention. We will freeze you out of this town. You will be a social pariah." It was a potent threat designed to induce panic. In the affluent circles of Salt Lake City, reputation operates as a tangible, vital currency. A whisper campaign initiated by the mother of the bride could inflict significant professional and social damage. She expected to see fear dawn in my eyes. She expected me to reach for my cell phone and frantically dial the caterer to beg for mercy. I picked up my Americano instead. The ceramic cup felt warm and solid in my hand. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast coffee hit the back of my throat. I set the cup down precisely on its matching saucer. "Tell them," I said. I held her furious gaze. "Call Evelyn Sterling today. Tell her everything." Helen blinked in shock. The sheer, unbothered confidence in my response short-circuited her strategic brain. She did not understand why her ultimate threat failed to secure my compliance. She did not realize I held a distinct structural advantage. I invited her to call the Sterlings because I knew a dark financial secret hidden deep within the wedding ledger, a secret my mother desperately concealed from both her husband and her future son-in-law. And that concealed truth was about to detonate right inside my office. I returned to my office shortly after 1 in the afternoon. The crisp air conditioning of the corporate building acted as a harsh cleanser, stripping away the lingering scent of Helen's synthetic jasmine perfume. I walked past the reception desk, offered a brief nod to my assistant, and closed my heavy glass door. The ambient noise of downtown Salt Lake City faded into a muted background hum. I sat in my chair, smoothed the fabric of my navy skirt, and opened my laptop. The coffee shop ambush had failed to secure my compliance. I knew my mother was currently sitting in the passenger seat of Lexi's SUV, calculating her next maneuver. She relied on the assumption that her secrets were safely buried under layers of suburban respectability. She did not comprehend how fragile her accounting truly was. To grasp the magnitude of the impending collapse, you must understand Tyler Sterling. The groom was not inherently malicious. He was simply insulated. He grew up inside a gilded terrarium constructed from generational wealth. He drove a pristine vintage Porsche to his private high school. He wore bespoke Italian loafers to casual Sunday brunches. He expected the machinery of life to operate without friction because his family employed teams of people to eliminate friction. He and I existed in entirely separate orbits. We rarely interacted at family functions because my practical mindset disrupted his polished reality. He only acknowledged my existence when a severe logistical error required correction. At exactly 3:45 in the afternoon, the digital display on my desk phone illuminated. The caller ID flashed an unfamiliar number with a Sandy area code, the affluent zip code where the Sterlings maintained their sprawling estate. I picked up the receiver and delivered my standard corporate greeting. "Ramona." The voice on the other end skipped any pretense of polite introduction. It was Tyler. His vocal cords were tight, leaking a sharp, distinct frustration. He sounded like a man who had just discovered a deep scratch on the hood of his expensive sports car. "My parents are furious." I leaned back in my chair. I did not interrupt him. In procurement, letting the opposing party talk is often the fastest route to discovering their structural weakness. The venue coordinator just returned my mother's voicemail. Tyler continued his breathing ragged. "They told Evelyn the master account balance is zeroed out and the reservation is pending immediate release. They said the authorized funding source was withdrawn." I picked up a silver pen and tapped it against my legal pad. "That is accurate, Tyler. I withdrew my funding." The silver pen froze midair when he spoke his next sentence. "They gave your mother $30,000 for their half of the venue, Ramona. Where is the money?" The oxygen in my office seemed to evaporate. The hum of the ventilation system vanished from my awareness. The numbers clicked into precise alignment inside my analytical brain. This was layer 5, financial deceit. The elaborate illusion Helen had meticulously crafted finally revealed its ugly foundation. My mother had lied to the Sterlings. She sat in their opulent drawing room, drank their imported tea, and fed them a fabricated narrative about sharing the wedding expenses. She presented herself as a proud, equal partner, ready to split the extravagant cost of the Park City resort. The Sterlings, operating under the assumption of mutual affluent respect, wrote her a check for $30,000. Helen never forwarded a single penny of that check to the venue. She intercepted the funds. She cashed the Sterling money and routed it directly into her own secret ledgers. She used their generous contribution to plug the gaping holes in her constructed lifestyle. That money likely paid off her delinquent country club dues. It covered her hidden credit card balances filled with charges for imported skincare and designer blazers. She managed her personal debts with her future son-in-law's inheritance, and she utilized my $64,200 to fund the actual event. I was bankrolling the entire wedding while providing the perfect financial smokescreen for her grand larceny. I was not just her private bank. I was her unwitting accomplice in defrauding one of the wealthiest families in Utah. Ramona Tyler snapped, his voice rising in volume. Are you listening to me? Evelyn is threatening to call her legal team. My parents think you are holding their funds hostage because you are bitter about the guest list. Where did you put their $30,000? He assumed I was the treasurer. He believed I managed a joint family account and decided to freeze the Sterling contribution out of spite. He thought he was speaking to a petty thief. I pressed my shoulders firmly against the back of my ergonomic chair. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my pitch to match his rising panic. I deployed the cold, forensic delivery of an auditor uncovering embezzlement. Tyler, I suggest you ask your future mother-in-law for a current bank statement. I paused, allowing the instruction to echo through the receiver. I have never seen a dime of your parents' money. I continued my pronunciation, sharp and deliberate. Every single vendor contract for this event was secured and funded directly by my personal checking account. If Evelyn handed a physical check to Helen, you need to ask your bank to trace that routing number. You will not find my signature on the endorsement line. The silence that followed was profound. It was not a simple pause in conversation. It was the sound of a structural collapse occurring inside Tyler's mind. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The elegant, sophisticated mother of his bride was not experiencing a minor clerical issue. She was operating a sophisticated grift. He was marrying into a family of charlatans. Tyler did not offer a rebuttal. He did not ask a follow-up question. The line emitted a sharp click, followed by a hollow dial tone. He hung up abruptly. I placed the receiver back onto the cradle. I looked out the glass window at the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city grid. The storm had officially migrated. It was no longer contained within my office or a downtown coffee shop. It was currently barreling toward the Sterling estate, and my mother possessed zero shelter. The Sterlings employed wealth managers and aggressive tax attorneys. They would demand an immediate paper trail. They would require forensic proof of where their capital went. Helen could not charm her way out of a ledger deficit. I anticipated a surrender. I expected Helen to call me weeping, begging for a short-term loan to cover the stolen funds before the Sterlings initiated a formal inquiry. I assumed Lexi would arrive at my front door waving a white flag, asking me to save her engagement from the impending wreckage. I applied logic to an illogical dynamic. Desperate people do not surrender when cornered. They fabricate a louder distraction. Lexi realized her wealthy fiancé was marching home to ask dangerous, undeniable questions about her mother's banking history. She needed to deflect his attention. She needed a villain large enough to overshadow $30,000 missing dollars. She required a public execution to garner immediate sympathy. Lexi did not pick up the phone to apologize to her older sister. She picked up her smartphone to launch a war. Instead of fighting me in a private financial arena where she knew I held all the ammunition, she dragged the battlefield into the digital square. She took the war online. If you have ever occupied the role of the designated scapegoat inside your family, you know exactly what the next maneuver entails. Drop a comment below if a blood relative has ever attempted to destroy your reputation solely to cover their own tracks. Tell me how you handled the fallout. The transition from private financial dispute to public character assassination is a very predictable pivot for toxic individuals. When the truth becomes too dangerous to face in a quiet room, the guilty party will construct a loud, fictional narrative in the public square. They manufacture an alternate reality where they are the helpless victim, and you are the cruel oppressor. Friday morning arrived with a jarring symphony of digital alerts. I usually wake up to a silent bedroom before my alarm rings. That specific morning, my smartphone was vibrating off the surface of my wooden nightstand. The device buzzed with a frantic, unyielding rhythm. The notification screen was a solid wall of incoming messages, social media tags, and missed calls. The digital onslaught had commenced long before the sun cleared the horizon. Lexi possessed a significant online footprint. She cultivated a pristine aesthetic tailored for the affluent Utah influencer demographic. Her standard uploads featured matcha lattes, designer workout gear, and flawlessly lit engagement photos. She understood lighting. She understood engagement metrics. She understood her audience. Sometime around 2 a.m, she weaponized that entire platform. I unlocked my phone and tapped the primary notification. The application opened directly to a freshly published broadcast. Lexi sat on the edge of her plush white sofa. She wore an oversized cashmere sweater pulled tightly around her shoulders, projecting an image of fragile vulnerability. The ring light illuminating her face was dimmed to a soft, sympathetic glow. She stared directly into the camera lens and allowed a single, pristine tear to trace down her cheek. It was a masterclass in theatrical manipulation. She spoke to her thousands of followers with a trembling voice. She claimed her dream wedding was currently being held hostage. She pointed the finger directly at me. She labeled me her bitter, divorced older sister. She informed her audience that I was harboring deep-seated jealousy regarding her upcoming marriage. According to her fabricated script, I was utilizing the vendor contracts to extort our elderly parents for attention. She painted a tragic portrait of a bride whose special day was being ripped away by a vindictive sibling unable to process her own failed romance. Notice the strategic omissions in her broadcast. She did not broadcast the text message explicitly stating, "I made the family look low class." She omitted any reference to the $64,200 I had personally wired to her vendors over the previous 14 months. She certainly did not mention the $30,000 check Helen intercepted and deposited into a secret ledger. In Lexi's cinematic upload, the math vanished. Only the manufactured emotion remained. The response from her digital community was instantaneous and severe. The phenomenon known as flying monkeys descended upon my personal accounts. These are the secondary participants who blindly believe the victim narrative and execute the social punishment on their behalf. Extended cousins I had not shared a meal with in 10 years sent venomous direct messages. Utah socialites who only knew me as the quiet sister lurking in the background of country club photos flooded my inbox. I scrolled through the incoming vitriol while sitting on the edge of my mattress. How could you do this to your own sister? You are a sick person. Tyler should file a restraining order against you. You are destroying your parents in their twilight years. The messages stacked upon each other, forming a towering monument to my ruined reputation. This represented layer 6 of the conflict, the systematic assassination of my character. The primary objective was not merely to insult me. The goal was to exert such overwhelming public pressure that I would break. They designed this humiliation to force my compliance. They assumed I would frantically reinstate the catering and floral funding just to stop the digital bleeding. Amidst the flood of strangers hurling insults, a singular text message arrived from a familiar contact. My father. Richard had remained remarkably silent since he stood on my front porch and begged me to save his social standing. He did not call to inquire about the missing Sterling funds. He did not demand accountability from his wife regarding the intercepted check. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose to protect the pageant queen. His text contained 2 short sentences. Look what you are doing to your sister. Fix this, or you are dead to us. I stared at those words for a long time. The harsh morning light filtered through my window blinds, casting sharp lines across the screen. My own father witnessed his wife commit blatant financial fraud. He knew I was the sole investor for this extravagant production. Yet he looked at his daughter's crying face on a social media feed and decided I was the primary villain. He issued a permanent ultimatum: surrender my capital or forfeit my family. A weaker person might have engaged in the digital mud wrestling. A different woman might have typed a furious response to Richard or posted a counter video exposing the bank statements to the entire internet. I declined to enter the arena. Arguing with a manufactured illusion only grants it legitimacy. When you negotiate high-stakes supply chain contracts, you learn a fundamental truth. Let the opposing parties scream. Let them expend their energy building a flimsy fortress. You just collect the bricks they drop along the way. I did not reply to a single direct message. I did not text my father back. I stood up and walked into my home office. I booted up my laptop and accessed my private network. I opened a fresh document and began the meticulous process of preservation. I captured high-resolution screenshots of every vile message sent by the extended family members. I recorded the exact timestamp of Richard's ultimatum. I downloaded Lexi's tearful broadcast in its entirety, ensuring the file was saved to a secure external drive. I utilized a transcription software to convert her spoken lies into a printed text document. I highlighted her specific claims regarding extortion and jealousy. My home printer hummed to life. The machine rhythmically spit out page after page of warm ink and crisp paper. I gathered the fresh evidence and carried it to my desk. I reached into my bottom drawer and retrieved a thick black leather portfolio, the kind of structured binder an executive carries into a hostile corporate takeover. I placed the printed vendor contracts inside the first sleeve. I slid my personal bank statements detailing the $64,000 expenditure into the second sleeve. I arranged the screenshots of the low-class text messages into the third. Finally, I filed the printed transcript of Lexi's digital smear campaign in the back. My mother and my sister desperately wanted a fictional public narrative. I was preparing a cold, documented audit. I snapped the black portfolio shut. The leather binding made a satisfying final sound. Lexi thought she had won the war because she controlled the comment section. She failed to realize that social media clout does not pay the bills in the physical world. The digital echo chamber could not alter the legal reality of my signature on the vendor agreements. The Park City Resort did not care about a viral video. They cared about the balance sheet. And while my family was busy performing for the internet, the luxury venue coordinator was waiting for my direct instructions regarding a $25,000 non-refundable asset. It was time to reallocate the real estate. The hospitality staff at the Park City Luxury Resort did not sign up for a fierce family war. They were highly accustomed to demanding brides and eccentric billionaires who requested out-of-season peonies. They were entirely unprepared for Helen Roberts. At 2 p.m, my office phone rang. The caller ID indicated the resort event management office. I picked up the receiver and heard the exhausted voice of Sarah, the primary venue coordinator. She sounded like a woman who had spent her entire shift negotiating with a brick wall. "Ms. Roberts," she sighed, "your mother has called our front desk 11 times since this morning." I leaned back in my chair and listened to the summary of the damage. Helen was executing a relentless campaign of telephone harassment. According to Sarah, my mother demanded the resort honor the original reservation date. She insisted they transfer the master contract into her own name without requiring a single dollar of payment toward the outstanding balance. She threatened to leave scathing reviews on every prominent bridal website. She threatened to contact the local Chamber of Commerce. She utilized every intimidation tactic she honed during her decades serving on the neighborhood board of directors. Sarah explained that the resort legal department had already reviewed the file. In the world of high-end event procurement, contracts function as the supreme law. Helen possessed zero legal standing. She did not hold the purse strings. She did not provide the initial signature. She was legally classified as an unauthorized third party attempting to hijack a secured corporate asset. Sarah apologized for bothering me, but she needed formal direction. She asked a very specific question regarding my non-refundable $25,000 venue deposit. She wanted to know if I intended to forfeit the funds or if I wanted to leave the account open for a future personal date. This represented the seventh layer of conflict, the formal legal battle over the physical assets. My mother believed she could bully a luxury resort into submission through sheer volume and suburban entitlement. She thought my financial withdrawal meant the venue was suddenly up for grabs like an abandoned piece of real estate. She fundamentally misunderstood how corporate logistics operate. I could have just let the money burn. I could have walked away from the $25,000 and considered it an expensive lesson in establishing family boundaries. But I am a logistics expert. I manage multi-million-dollar supply chains. I do not burn valuable assets. I leverage them. I looked at the calendar on my desk and realized a pristine opportunity was sitting right in front of me. I am not canceling the date, Sarah. I spoke into the receiver with a crisp, measured tone. I am reallocating the event. My corporate firm possesses a robust philanthropic division. Every single year, we host a prominent charity gala to raise funds for a local pediatric hospital. The planning committee usually scrambled to secure a boring hotel ballroom in downtown Salt Lake City. The events were historically polite, but visually uninspiring. Lexi was scheduled to marry Tyler Sterling on the exact same weekend our corporate charity gala was slated to occur. The logistical overlap was undeniable. I instructed Sarah to formally transfer the name on the event contract from a personal wedding reservation to a corporate fundraiser. I provided my company tax identification number. I authorized the resort to retain the $25,000 deposit and apply it directly to the philanthropic event. I did not stop with the venue. I executed a sweeping acquisition of the remaining assets. I contacted Julian, the panicked luxury caterer. I informed him his services were still required. He would no longer be serving herb-crusted lamb to wealthy socialites judging a bride. He would be serving his elite menu to pediatric surgeons and generous tech philanthropists donating money to sick children. I contacted the floral designer. I instructed her to repurpose the thousands of rare white orchids. Instead of framing an aisle for Lexi, they would serve as stunning centerpieces for our silent auction tables. Within 2 hours, I had effectively transformed my staggering personal financial loss into a spectacular charitable write-off for my corporation. The deposits were no longer wasted capital. They were philanthropic contributions securing premium services for a noble cause. I salvaged the money I saved the vendor contracts, and I removed the wedding from the Utah map. In a city like Salt Lake, news of a major venue upgrade travels with lightning speed. The Pediatric Hospital Foundation was thrilled with the sudden acquisition of a premium Park City resort. Their marketing director immediately drafted a press release and posted a digital announcement to their social media channels. They tagged the venue. They tagged the floral designer. They publicly thanked my corporate firm for securing such an elite location for their annual gala. The digital footprint of that announcement was impossible to miss. Helen monitored the local society pages with hawkish intensity. She saw the post. She saw the photographs of the resort she had promised to the Sterlings, now plastered with banners for a children's medical charity. The realization struck her with devastating force. Her daughter had not simply canceled the wedding. Her daughter had usurped the entire kingdom and handed the keys to sick children. I was sitting at my kitchen island that evening, reviewing the updated catering menu on my laptop. The sun had dipped below the horizon, plunging my quiet suburban street into darkness. The sudden glare of bright headlights swept across my living room wall. I heard the distinct, heavy crunch of tires rolling over my gravel driveway. I did not need to check the security camera to know who had arrived. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. The crisp night air rushed into the foyer. Helen stood on my front porch. She wore a dark trench coat buttoned tightly to her chin. Her posture was rigid, vibrating with a suppressed, furious energy. She looked ready to tear the door right off its hinges. But she did not come to my house alone. She brought her ultimate shield. My father, Richard, stood half a step behind her. He wore a faded gray jacket and held his favorite baseball cap tightly in his hands. His shoulders were slumped forward. He refused to make direct eye contact with me. He stared intently at the wooden planks of my porch. He looked exactly like a man who had been dragged out of his comfortable recliner and forced to defuse a live explosive device he had helped build. Richard was the classic enabler. He spent his entire marriage dodging conflict by allowing Helen to steamroll anyone who opposed her. He sacrificed my emotional well-being for decades just to ensure his dinner was served on time and his weekends remained peaceful. He stood on my porch not as a protector, but as a human bargaining chip. Helen brought him because she knew I possessed a soft spot for his quiet demeanor. She intended to use his fragile health and pathetic posture to manipulate my boundaries. She wanted him to beg for the venue back. I crossed my arms over my chest and stood firmly in the doorway, blocking their entry. The porch light cast harsh shadows across their faces. The battle over the physical assets was complete. The legal contracts were locked away in my corporate vault, but the emotional war was just arriving on my doorstep, and the enabler was about to make his required compromise. I stood in the open doorway observing the two individuals who brought me into this world. The amber glow of the porch light illuminated the stark contrast between their physical postures. Helen radiated a frantic, hostile energy. She glared at me, expecting me to crumble under the sheer weight of her presence. Richard merely stared at the toes of his worn leather shoes. I made a rapid, tactical decision. I looked directly at my father and delivered a single instruction. "You can come inside. She stays on the porch." Helen gasped. Her mouth opened to launch a verbal assault. I held up one hand, palm facing outward, and kept my eyes locked on Richard. The choice belonged entirely to him. He could stand in the freezing night air with his furious wife, or he could enter my home and attempt his negotiation. Richard shuffled forward. He stepped over the threshold. I shut the heavy wooden door right in Helen's face. The solid click of the deadbolt severed her from the conversation. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. Richard followed a few paces behind. His footsteps were heavy, dragging against the hardwood floor. He carried a faded blue baseball cap, twisting the fabric nervously between his knuckles. The kitchen was bright and sterile. The overhead pendant lights reflected off the smooth, dark granite of the island. I motioned toward a tall wooden stool. He climbed onto the seat, but he refused to look me in the eye. He kept his gaze firmly fixed on a bowl of green apples resting on the counter. To comprehend the depth of this specific wound, you must examine Richard's historical role in the Roberts family. My father spent 30 years allowing Helen to drive the narrative. He operated as a passive passenger in his own life. He cultivated an image of the easygoing patriarch, the nice guy who simply wanted everyone to get along. But a passive witness to ongoing mistreatment is simply a quiet accomplice. He never shielded me from Helen's critiques. He never defended my career choices or my independence. He only stepped into the arena when the fallout threatened his personal peace and quiet. He intervened when the shouting grew too loud for him to watch his evening television programs. This moment represented layer 8 of the conflict, the emotional betrayal of the enabler. The overt aggressor attacks you directly, but the enabler slides in through the side door. They wear the mask of a peacemaker while handing you the exact same poison. "Ramona, baby," he started. His voice was thin and reedy. It lacked any real conviction. He sounded like a man reading from a script he had only glanced at in the car. "Your mother is out of her mind over this venue situation. The Sterlings are threatening to call off the entire wedding. Tyler's parents contacted her this afternoon demanding a formal audit of the wedding funds. They want to see the bank statements. I turned my back to him and faced the espresso machine. I pulled a ceramic mug from the upper cabinet. I listened to the hiss of the steam wand and the dark liquid filling the cup. The scent of roasted espresso beans filled the space between us. I did not feel a spike of panic at his revelation. I felt a cold, stabilizing clarity. The Sterlings were executing the precise maneuver I predicted. They were rich and they were meticulous. They protected their capital. I turned around and slid the warm mug across the granite island. The ceramic bottom scraped softly against the stone. They should, I replied. 2 words, simple and factual. Richard flinched. He reached up and rubbed his face, pulling the skin beneath his eyes downward. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a man who just wanted the friction to disappear. He leaned his elbows on the counter and delivered the compromise he and Helen had undoubtedly practiced during the drive over. "Just give us the venue back, Ramona." He kept his voice low, trying to inject a tone of fatherly wisdom into an inherently toxic request. "You do not even have to come to the ceremony. Just transfer the paperwork back to your mother and pay the final catering invoices. Be the bigger person here. Do it for me." I stood perfectly still. The ambient hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify in the quiet room. I examined the man sitting across from me. He was not asking me to reconcile. He was not suggesting we sit down and heal the fractured family dynamic. He was asking me to accept my own erasure in order to save his suburban reputation. He wanted me to quietly fund the party, forfeit my seat at the table, and fade into the background so he would not have to deal with his wife's rage or the Sterlings and their lawyers. He was managing me. He was treating me like a rogue asset that needed to be brought back under control. "You told me I made the family look low class, Dad." I spoke the sentence with a perfectly level cadence. I did not inject anger. I did not inject sorrow. I merely reflected his own verified text message right back at his face. I watched his eyes dart nervously toward the stainless steel sink, unable to meet my stare. "You typed those specific words into a group chat 48 hours ago," I continued. "You agreed with Helen. You decided my presence was a liability to Lexi's new social standing. A low-class person cannot afford to host a luxury event in Park City. You will have to find another investor to fund your merger." The thin illusion of his fatherly negotiation shattered. The harsh reality of his own documented cruelty trapped him in the corner. He possessed no logical counter-argument. He could not claim I was twisting his words because his words were permanently preserved in a digital screenshot sitting inside my black portfolio. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The tension stretched tight and unbroken. Richard slid off the wooden stool. His movements were slow and lethargic. He looked like a deflated balloon losing the last remnants of its air. He left the full mug of coffee untouched on the island. He turned and walked back down the hallway toward the front door. He did not offer a goodbye. He did not offer an apology. He simply retreated to the cold porch where his furious commander was waiting in the dark. I locked the deadbolt behind him and watched their headlights sweep across my living room wall as they backed out of the driveway. The enabler had failed to secure the assets. My boundary held firm, but the strategic retreat of my parents did not signify the end of the war. It merely signaled a shift in the primary combatants. The affluent in-laws realized Helen and Richard were drowning in their own deceit. Tyler's parents were stepping onto the battlefield. The Sterlings were not content with a simple phone call or a canceled venue. They demanded an audience. The next layer of conflict arrived via courier the following morning in the form of a formal invitation to a high-stakes sit-down dinner. A courier wearing a crisp gray uniform arrived at my corporate office the following morning. He bypassed the reception desk and handed a thick, cream-colored envelope directly to my executive assistant. The paper was heavy and expensive. The return address featured the Sterling family crest embossed in raised silver ink. Evelyn Sterling did not send digital calendar invites for matters of high importance. She sent formal, physical summons. Evelyn operated within the upper echelons of Utah high society the way a seasoned general commands a battlefield. She sat on prestigious museum boards and orchestrated massive philanthropic galas. But her true expertise was identifying and neutralizing threats to her family legacy. She recognized a structural anomaly in Helen's wedding narrative. She smelled the deceit. Now she intended to dissect it in person. I broke the silver wax seal and pulled out the card. It requested my immediate presence at a formal dinner at their sprawling estate in Sandy that Friday evening. The printed purpose was stated in elegant cursive font: to clear the air and align our family values before the nuptials. It was not a polite request for a pleasant shared meal. It was a carefully worded subpoena. At noon, my office phone indicated a new voicemail. It was Helen. I pressed play and held the speaker to my ear. The hostile, vibrating energy she displayed on my front porch had vanished. In its place was a frantic, breathless sobbing. This was layer 9 of the conflict, the desperate cover-up. "Ramona, you have to come to the dinner." Her voice cracked, catching on the sharp edges of her own rising panic. "You have to tell them you made a clerical error with the venue paperwork. You need to look Evelyn in the eye and say, 'I paid you back for the deposits months ago.' Tyler's parents are threatening to freeze the trust funds. If you do not lie for me, Tyler is going to leave Lexi." I listened to the recording twice to fully process the sheer audacity required to formulate those sentences. My mother possessed a specific type of pathology. She had formally disinvited her own daughter from a wedding, calling her an embarrassment and a low-class liability. Yet a mere 48 hours later, she was begging that same daughter to commit verbal fraud to save her social standing. I was deemed too plain to witness the vows, but I was suddenly the guest of honor required to guarantee their survival. She did not offer a single word of apology for her cruelty. She was not sorry for hurting me. She was only terrified because the Sterlings had cornered her. I sat at my desk and considered hitting the delete button. I could decline the invitation. I could block their phone numbers and let the Sterling legal team tear Helen and Richard apart in the dark. It would be a clean, quiet exit. I could walk away and never look back at the wreckage. But my mind drifted to the master spreadsheet saved on my encrypted hard drive. I thought about the 14 consecutive months of writing 5-figure checks. I remembered signing the contract for the string quartet while sitting alone in my kitchen, eating a cold dinner after working a 12-hour shift. I remembered paying the invoice for Lexi's custom imported lace gown while watching her and Helen post shopping spree photographs online. I paid for the champagne they drank without me. I funded the affluent reality they utilized to exclude me. I functioned as their invisible engine. I remembered the text message glowing on my screen. "You make us look low class." I opened my corporate email client. I typed a brief professional response to Evelyn Sterling. I confirmed my attendance for Friday evening. I did not include polite pleasantries or expressions of gratitude. I replied with the clinical brevity of a vendor confirming an upcoming audit schedule. I hit send. Friday evening arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping down from the canyons. I stood in my bedroom and examined my closet. I did not prepare for a festive social gathering. I prepared for a hostile acquisition. In my line of work, clothing functions as a highly effective psychological tool. If you wear a flowing cocktail dress, you signal a desire to mingle and please the host. If you wear a tailored suit, you signal a desire to conduct serious business and enforce boundaries. I bypassed the evening wear. I selected a dark navy business suit. The fabric was sharp, the lines were severe, and it fit like a second skin. It was the exact armor I wore when I walked into corporate boardrooms to dismantle failing supply chains. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight style. I wore zero jewelry. I stripped away the identity of the compliant older sister and fully adopted the identity of the chief financial officer. I retrieved the thick black leather portfolio from my home office desk. I opened the cover to verify the contents one final time. Tab 1 held the master venue contract bearing my exclusive signature. Tab 2 contained my personal checking account statements highlighting $64,200 in cleared vendor payments. Tab 3 showcased the printed transcript of Lexi's fabricated internet broadcast where she called me a jealous extortionist. Tab 4 displayed the high-resolution screenshots of my parents disinviting me for lacking class. The paper trail was flawless. The ledgers were balanced. The undeniable truth was neatly organized and securely bound in leather. I zipped the portfolio shut and placed it inside my structured tote bag. I walked out of my house and climbed into my car. The drive to the affluent suburb of Sandy took exactly 40 minutes. The highway stretched before me, illuminated by a steady stream of headlights. I did not feel a single tremor of anxiety. I felt a profound sense of calm settling deep into my bones. For years, I had allowed my family to operate in the shadows. They fed off my financial resources while demanding my total silence. They punished my independence while spending my paycheck. Tonight, those shadows would be flooded with harsh, fluorescent light. I steered my vehicle toward the sprawling Sterling estate, ready to close the ledger on a lifetime of exploitation. I parked my car near the towering wrought iron gates. The real confrontation, the dinner of illusions, was waiting just behind their heavy oak doors. The heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate did not merely open. They swung wide to reveal a meticulously curated fortress of generational wealth. I stepped over the threshold and handed my coat to a uniformed staff member. The foyer featured towering marble columns and a sweeping dual staircase that seemed designed to make visitors feel incredibly small. The air inside the house felt climate-controlled to a precise degree, smelling faintly of beeswax and expensive cut floral arrangements. I walked toward the formal living room with the measured stride of an auditor entering a hostile corporate environment. My family arrived before me. They sat shoulder to shoulder on a long, curved velvet sofa. The visual contrast between my relatives and their affluent surroundings was stark. Helen sat rigidly upright. Her posture was stiff, her knees pressed tightly together. She wore a tailored beige dress that looked pristine, but her physical tension betrayed her panic. Lexi sat next to her, staring at the Persian rug. Her eyes were bloodshot and swollen, indicating hours of recent crying. The flawless makeup she usually wore was smudged near the corners of her eyelids. Richard occupied the far end of the sofa. He looked like a captive, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water and staring blankly at a classical landscape painting on the wall. Tyler Sterling stood near a grand stone fireplace. He did not step forward to greet me. He did not offer a polite handshake. His jaw was clenched tight and his arms were crossed defensively over his chest. He radiated a quiet, intense fury. His parents, Marcus and Evelyn Sterling, occupied matching wingback chairs opposite my family. They observed the room with the cold, polite condescension of people who buy and sell large corporate entities for sport. They built their empire 3 generations ago, and they possess the innate ability to dismantle opponents without ever raising their vocal pitch. Evelyn Sterling stood up. She wore a simple silk blouse and tailored trousers. She did not require flashy designer logos to broadcast her net worth. She assessed my navy business suit. A brief flicker of confusion crossed her features. She expected a disorganized, erratic older sister arriving to beg for forgiveness. She did not expect a woman dressed in sharp corporate armor holding a structured leather tote bag. "Dinner is served," Evelyn announced. Her voice was smooth and commanding. We transitioned from the living room into a cavernous dining room. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the space. It easily seated 20 individuals, but only 7 place settings were arranged. Heavy silver cutlery gleamed under the warm glow of a cascading crystal chandelier. I found my designated seat card. I sat directly across from Helen and Lexi. Evelyn claimed the head of the table. Marcus anchored the opposite end. The physical arrangement mirrored a tribunal. This environment initiated layer 10 of the conflict, the social posturing. Uniformed servers entered the room on silent footsteps and placed shallow porcelain bowls in front of us. The first course consisted of seasonal greens and a light vinaigrette. The only sounds in the room were the soft clinking of silver forks against porcelain. Evelyn broke the silence. She did not launch a direct accusation. She deployed a calculated, subtle strike. "Wedding planning is an incredibly demanding endeavor," she stated, taking a delicate bite of her salad. "It requires a specific logistical finesse. I often notice that families lacking a certain background find large-scale event management quite difficult to navigate. The stress can cause new money to fracture under the pressure. The insult was neatly packaged inside a polite observation. She called my mother new money. She implied my family lacked the inherent breeding to execute a high society function. She demanded an explanation for the canceled venue without asking a single direct question. Helen reacted exactly as I anticipated. Her survival instincts kicked in. She gripped the stem of her crystal wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. The red liquid inside the bowl trembled, sending tiny ripples across the surface. She relied on her default defense mechanism. She performed. "Oh, Evelyn, you are so right," Helen said. She attempted a light, breathy laugh. The sound was hollow and scraped against the quiet room. "It has been a whirlwind of a week, but I assure you everything is under control. We simply experienced a minor administrative hurdle." Evelyn raised one perfectly groomed eyebrow. "An administrative hurdle." She repeated the phrase slowly. "Yes," Helen continued, leaning forward eagerly. Her eyes darted toward me for a fraction of a second before returning to her host. "Ramona has been so overwhelmed at her corporate job lately. Her firm is demanding long hours, and she just made a silly clerical error with the venue paperwork. She accidentally paused the funding transfer. It is a terrible misunderstanding, but we are sorting it out tomorrow." Helen lied straight to the face of a billionaire. She fabricated a narrative portraying me as an exhausted, incompetent employee who bungled a bank transfer. She attempted to throw me under the bus, assuming I would silently accept the blame to avoid a public confrontation. She believed the intense social pressure of the Sterling dining room would force my compliance. Lexi decided to assist in the deception. "Ramona is just so disorganized," Lexi chimed in. She offered a lighthearted giggle that fell entirely flat. The sound died instantly in the vast space. "She means well, but she forgets things when she gets stressed out. I told Tyler not to worry. My sister is just a little chaotic." I sat back in my chair. I observed the beads of sweat forming on Richard's forehead. He stared intensely at his salad, cutting a single leaf into microscopic pieces. He refused to look up and contradict the lie. In high-stakes negotiation, you learn a vital tactic. When the opposing party begins to dig a hole, you do not steal their shovel. You let them dig. You allow them to construct a towering structure of falsehoods, because a taller structure creates a much louder noise when you finally kick out the supporting beams. I did not interrupt my mother. I did not defend my professional competence. I let the silence stretch. I picked up my silver fork. I took a bite of the seasonal greens. The vinaigrette tasted sharp and acidic. I chewed, slowly swallowed, and took a sip of my iced water. The Sterlings watched me. Tyler glared, waiting for me to frantically apologize and confirm the fabricated story. They received serene silence instead. My refusal to play the assigned role of the chaotic sister caused the tension to escalate rapidly. The staff cleared the salad bowls and brought out the main course: roasted poultry and root vegetables. The conversation stalled. Helen tried to fill the void with frantic, nervous chatter about floral arrangements and weather forecasts. Nobody engaged with her topics. The silence forced her to talk faster, adding unnecessary details to her lies. She mentioned banking algorithms and busy schedules, digging her trap deeper with every spoken sentence. The main course concluded. The plates were whisked away by the silent staff. The polished mahogany table was mostly bare, save for the crystal glasses and a few linen napkins. Evelyn cleared her throat. She shifted in her chair, preparing to drop the polite facade and demand a definitive answer regarding the $30,000 she handed to my mother. She expected a tearful confession or a desperate plea for a loan. Before Evelyn could utter a single syllable, I made my move. I reached down to the floor where my structured leather tote bag rested against the leg of my chair. I grasped the brass zipper and pulled. The sharp, metallic sound sliced through the heavy quiet of the dining room. I reached inside the bag. I lifted the thick, black leather portfolio and placed it directly onto the center of the mahogany table. The presentation of the receipts was about to commence. I am not disorganized. I stated the fact with absolute conviction. My voice carried across the expansive dining room, reflecting off the vaulted ceiling. The crisp, confident pitch cut through the lingering tension like a surgical blade. I am a corporate procurement director. My entire job requires flawless organization. I flipped the heavy cover of the black leather portfolio. The binder rested flat against the polished mahogany wood. This action initiated layer 11 of the overall conflict, the formal presentation of the receipts. In my profession, verbal promises hold zero weight. The only truth exists within the written documentation. My family had spent the preceding 48 hours constructing elaborate fables. I arrived at the Sterling estate prepared to execute a forensic audit. I extracted the first sheet of high-quality printer paper from the front sleeve. I extended my arm and slid the document directly across the table toward Marcus Sterling. The patriarch of the real estate empire sat back, slightly startled by the sudden shift in momentum. He did not anticipate a formal presentation. This document is the master venue contract for the Park City Resort, I explained. My tone mirrored the detached clinical delivery of a financial presentation. You will notice the signature line located at the bottom of page 4. The sole name listed on this legally binding agreement is Ramona Roberts. My parents do not possess signing authority. My sister does not possess signing authority. The cancellation was not a clerical error resulting from exhaustion. It was a deliberate, authorized termination. I reached back into the portfolio. I pulled out a stapled packet of financial records. These pages contained the detailed transaction history exported directly from my private banking portal. I slid the thick packet toward the center of the table. These are the chronological bank transfers, I continued. The records detail $64,200 in cleared vendor payments. Every catering deposit, every floral installment, and every photography retainer originated from my personal checking account over the last 14 consecutive months. I funded the entirety of this event. Helen gasped. The sound was sharp and panicked, tearing through the quiet air. She lurched forward in her chair, grabbing the edge of the mahogany table with both hands. Her manicured fingernails dug into the wood. The polite, sophisticated facade she desperately tried to maintain during the salad course evaporated entirely. She reverted to the aggressive, cornered predator I encountered at the downtown coffee shop. "Ramona, stop it right now," Helen hissed. Her voice dropped to a harsh, urgent whisper. Her eyes darted wildly toward Evelyn and Marcus, silently pleading with them to disregard the paperwork. "Do not show them those personal documents. This is a private family matter." I ignored her frantic command. I did not turn my head to acknowledge her panic. I kept my focus locked squarely on the hosts. The truth was finally sitting on the table, and no amount of suburban gaslighting could force it back into the shadows. I turned my attention to Evelyn Sterling. She sat completely still, her gaze alternating between my face and the financial packets resting in front of her husband. "Your son Tyler called my office on Wednesday afternoon," I stated, maintaining my steady, measured cadence. "He called inquiring about a $30,000 check you personally handed to my parents. He claimed those funds were intended to split the exorbitant venue costs evenly." Evelyn offered a tight, microscopic nod, confirming the existence of the money. "I have never seen that money," I declared. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I did not soften the blow. I did not offer a polite excuse to spare my mother's feelings. I delivered the raw, unvarnished truth. As you can clearly verify from these comprehensive ledgers, my parents have not contributed a single dollar toward this wedding. I was the sole investor. If you gave Helen a check for $30,000, I strongly suggest you demand a forensic accounting of her personal debts, because those funds never reached the vendors. The sprawling dining room fell completely silent. The ambient noise ceased. Nobody shifted in their seats. Nobody reached for a water glass. The collective breathing in the room seemed to halt. The magnitude of the revelation paralyzed the table. I had just formally accused my mother of intercepting a massive cash payment and utilizing a fraudulent wedding narrative to cover her tracks. I exposed a sophisticated financial grift occurring right under the noses of one of Utah's wealthiest families. Marcus Sterling leaned forward. He did not look at Helen. He did not look at Lexi. He reached out and picked up the stapled packet of my personal bank statements. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and slid them onto his face. He began to review the numbers. He possessed decades of experience navigating aggressive corporate acquisitions and complex real estate portfolios. He read the dense columns of data with the rapid efficiency of a man who recognizes financial fraud the moment it hits the ledger. He flipped to the second page. His eyes scanned the cleared transaction dates, matching them against the vendor invoices I provided. He cross-referenced the large withdrawals with the timeline of his own $30,000 contribution. The math was simple and devastatingly clear. My money paid the bills. His money vanished into thin air. Richard, my father, stared intensely at his empty porcelain plate. He appeared physically ill. His skin took on a gray pallor. The enabler, who spent 3 decades hiding from conflict, was now trapped in the epicenter of a massive detonation. He could not claim ignorance. He could not pretend he misunderstood the situation. He sat at the table complicit in his wife's grand deception because he lacked the moral courage to stop her. Lexi remained frozen on the velvet chair. The golden child, the former pageant queen, who commanded attention her entire life, suddenly shrank. The glamorous illusion of her opulent wedding dissolved before her eyes. She realized the expensive fairy tale she flaunted online was built entirely on a foundation of stolen money and unpaid sibling labor. Her gaze shifted slowly toward Tyler. Tyler Sterling stared at the bank statements resting in his father's hands. The reality of the situation crashed over him. His future mother-in-law was not a sophisticated socialite. She was a petty embezzler. His beautiful bride was not a victim of a jealous older sister. She was a willing participant in a lavish charade funded by the exact sister she publicly vilified. Marcus Sterling lowered the paperwork. He removed his reading glasses and folded them slowly, placing them next to his crystal water glass. The quiet, calculated movement signaled the end of his review. The verdict was reached. The ledgers were analyzed, and the Roberts family was found severely lacking. He turned his head slowly. He locked eyes with my mother. The polite condescension Evelyn displayed earlier was absent. Marcus projected the cold, ruthless authority of a chief executive officer preparing to terminate a toxic partnership. The charade was over. The physical evidence dismantled the lies. The silence stretched thick and heavy, waiting for the patriarch to deliver his assessment. The foundation of the upcoming marriage was crumbling, and the wealthy in-laws were about to demand a final accounting. Marcus Sterling broke the silence. He did not yell. He did not pound his fist against the mahogany table. Men who control millions of dollars rarely resort to physical theatrics to convey their displeasure. His voice dropped an entire octave, settling into a low, resonant rumble that filled the dining room. "Helen," he said. The single name functioned as a harsh spotlight trained directly on my mother. Where is our $30,000? The question hung in the air, demanding an immediate factual response. Helen could not deploy her sweet HOA committee voice to defuse this specific bomb. She could not dismiss the inquiry as a minor clerical glitch. The financial receipts were sitting inches from Marcus's hands. The truth was stark and undeniable. Helen began to stammer. Her carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing the sheer panic underneath. The words tumbled from her mouth in a frantic, incoherent babble. "Well, Marcus, you see, there was a delay with the regional banking branch. I transferred the funds into a short-term, high-yield investment account to generate a small return before the final vendor payments were due. The bank placed a temporary hold on the liquid assets. It is a standard security protocol for large transfers. I assure you the money is perfectly safe." It was a pathetic, transparent lie. She strung together financial buzzwords, hoping the jargon would confuse the issue. She forgot her audience. Marcus Sterling built his fortune navigating complex commercial real estate acquisitions. He understood banking protocols intimately. He recognized a desperate fabrication instantly. "A temporary hold," Evelyn Sterling repeated. Her tone was sharp, layered with distinct, icy skepticism. "You deposited a check written specifically for wedding logistics into a high-yield investment account without our authorization, and you neglected to inform the vendors, resulting in the cancellation of the primary venue. That is your official explanation, Helen." Evelyn did not wait for a response. She looked at Richard. The silent enabler was practically vibrating in his chair. He stared intently at the rim of his crystal water glass, refusing to meet the gaze of the wealthy hosts. "Richard," Evelyn said, her voice slicing through his passive defense, "did you authorize this phantom investment strategy?" Richard opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His throat worked convulsively. He looked like a man drowning in shallow water. He spent his entire marriage hiding behind his wife's aggressive maneuvering. Now the shield was gone, and he was exposed to the brutal consequences of their shared deception. He managed a weak shake of his head before returning his gaze to the table. His silence confirmed his complicity. Lexi shattered the remaining tension. The former pageant queen who spent her morning posting a pristine, tearful video to her thousands of followers finally broke down in reality. She burst into genuine, ugly tears. Her shoulders heaved, her carefully applied makeup smeared across her cheeks. The glamorous illusion she cultivated for the Sterling family evaporated entirely. She realized the affluent future she envisioned was currently burning to the ground. This reaction initiated layer 12 of the conflict, the revelation of true colors. When the pressure reaches critical mass, the polished masks slip and the core character of each participant is exposed. Tyler turned his body toward his fiancée. The protective, defensive posture he displayed in the living room was gone. His face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. The realization struck him that the beautiful woman sitting next to him was a willing, active participant in the fraud. "You told me your sister was a jealous psycho," Tyler said, his voice tight with rising anger. He pointed a finger toward the black portfolio resting on the table. "You sat in my car crying and told me Ramona was stealing your venue out of spite. You claimed she was trying to ruin your life. But you knew the truth. You have been living off her this whole time." Lexi sobbed louder, burying her face in her hands. She did not attempt to deny the accusation. The physical evidence presented by the bank statements rendered any defense useless. "She knew I funded the event. She knew her mother intercepted the Sterling check. She willingly participated in the digital smear campaign to protect the grift." The Sterlings did not care about the $30,000. To a family of their immense wealth, that sum represented a minor rounding error on a monthly balance sheet. They cared deeply about the embarrassment. They cared about their legacy. They realized they were dangerously close to legally binding their prestigious name to a family of suburban grifters. They narrowly avoided an alliance with people who viewed their bank accounts as an open buffet. The dining room descended into a chaotic mixture of Lex's sobbing and Helen's frantic, desperate attempts to restart her failed investment narrative. I did not participate in the noise. I remained seated, watching the destruction unfold with a detached, clinical calmness. I waited for a brief lull in the frantic crosstalk. When Helen paused to take a ragged breath, I leaned forward. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. The panic radiating from her gaze was profound. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I reached into the final sleeve of the black portfolio. I pulled out a single sheet of printer paper. It was the high-resolution screenshot of the text messages exchanged on Tuesday morning. "You texted me last week. Helen," I said, my voice projecting clearly over Lex's weeping. "You formally informed me that I was not invited to this wedding. You stated that my presence was an embarrassment." I slid the printed screenshot across the mahogany table, placing it deliberately on top of the financial statements resting in front of Marcus. "You told me I make this family look low class." Marcus glanced down at the paper. Evelyn leaned over to read the highlighted text. The brutal cruelty of the words resonated in the quiet space. The text message provided the crucial context explaining my sudden financial withdrawal. It proved I was not a chaotic, unreliable sister. I was a targeted, discarded ATM. I did not cancel the venue out of jealousy. I continued ensuring my pronunciation was sharp and flawless. I canceled the vendor contracts because I refused to fund a lavish production for people who are fundamentally ashamed of me. I refused to underwrite an illusion for a family that values a specific zip code more than their own blood. I reached forward and pulled the black portfolio toward my chest. I closed the heavy leather cover. The thick binder contained my redemption. The ledgers were balanced. The audit was complete. I stood up from the mahogany table. The sudden movement drew the eyes of everyone in the room. I reached behind me and pushed my chair in. The wooden legs scraped softly against the expensive rug. I did not wait for a dismissal. I did not ask for permission to leave. I turned my back on the wreckage and walked toward the grand foyer. I felt a tremendous physical weight lift off my shoulders with every step I took away from the dining room. The facade had crumbled, and the architect of the disaster was left to face the furious investors she tried to swindle. But desperate people do not simply apologize when their schemes are exposed. They attempt a final chaotic maneuver to salvage the ruins. Helen was cornered, but she possessed one last dangerous tactic to secure the funds she desperately needed. As I walked out of the Sterling estate, the heavy oak doors shut firmly behind me. The crisp Utah night air filled my lungs. I walked down the sweeping driveway toward my parked vehicle. A profound physical weight lifted from my shoulders. For 14 months, I carried the burden of underwriting a fictional reality. I funded an elaborate stage play designed to exclude me. Now, the ledger was officially closed. I drove back to my quiet home, anticipating a peaceful conclusion to the hostility. I assumed the brutal public exposure inside that dining room would force my mother into a humiliated retreat. I expected silence. I applied logic to a fundamentally illogical person. Desperate individuals rarely surrender when cornered. They typically double down and attempt a much more dangerous maneuver. During my divorce 2 years prior, my former husband attempted to drain our shared financial accounts. To protect my personal assets, I placed a strict security freeze on my Social Security number. Any new line of credit required direct verbal authorization from me. It was a standard protective measure for anyone navigating a messy separation. I kept the safeguard active, treating my personal data with the same rigorous protocols I applied to international supply chains. I trusted nobody with my credit score. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, my smartphone buzzed on my office desk. It was a Tuesday morning. The notification was not a furious text message from a sibling. It was an automated emergency alert from my credit monitoring service. The bright red banner warned of a severe security event. I unlocked the screen and opened the application. Someone had just submitted an online application for a $40,000 unsecured personal loan. The applicant utilized my full legal name, my date of birth, and my protected government identification numbers. This event represented layer 13 of the conflict, the ultimate betrayal. Helen realized the Sterlings were demanding their missing funds immediately. She could not access her drained joint checking accounts. She could not sell her luxury vehicles fast enough to generate the required cash. Instead of facing the consequences of her embezzlement, she decided to commit a federal offense. She attempted to steal her older daughter's identity to secure the capital needed to refund Evelyn and Marcus. She thought she could quietly intercept the loan, pay off the angry in-laws, and somehow force the marriage back onto the calendar. She viewed my pristine credit score as just another asset she was entitled to harvest. The fraud department of the lending institution initiated a verification call 10 minutes later. A representative asked if I had recently applied for a significant influx of cash. I sat in my ergonomic chair and reviewed the digital footprints on my monitor. The application logged a specific IP address. The geographic location originated precisely from my parents' residential zip code. I did not merely tell the bank representative to decline the transaction. I informed the lending institution that I was the victim of active identity theft. I requested they forward the fraudulent application details to the proper authorities. I instructed them to flag the IP address for criminal review. I did not want my mother to spend a decade in a federal penitentiary. Despite her endless cruelty, she was still the woman who raised me. I wanted her to experience the exact type of consequence she feared most in this world: public humiliation. By formally reporting the incident, routine protocol required local law enforcement to investigate the origin of the fraudulent submission. Later that afternoon, a marked police cruiser pulled into Helen and Richard's pristine driveway. Imagine the scene in their manicured subdivision. This was a neighborhood where grass was measured with rulers and trash cans were hidden behind custom fencing. Neighbors who served on the community board peeked through their expensive window blinds. They watched two uniformed officers walk up the clean brick pathway to question the self-appointed queen of the social committee. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the pristine landscaping. The officers knocked on the door and asked Helen direct questions regarding online bank fraud. Richard stood in the background watching his wife attempt to charm armed detectives. Her sweet HOA voice failed to sway law enforcement. They informed her that a formal investigation was underway regarding stolen credentials. I declined to press formal felony charges when the lead detective called me for a follow-up interview. I halted the legal process just short of placing my mother in a holding cell. The criminal investigation was suspended, but the societal damage was permanent and devastating. The squad car parked in the driveway served as the final nail in the coffin. Word travels fast in exclusive residential enclaves. The Sterlings possessed an extensive network of wealthy informants. Within hours, Evelyn learned about the police visit. The affluent matriarch executed a swift, ruthless termination of the relationship. She called Helen and delivered a brief, chilling message. The Sterlings officially canceled the wedding. Evelyn forbade my parents from ever contacting her family again. Tyler Sterling visited Lex's childhood home that same evening. He did not bring flowers or a desire to reconcile. He arrived to retrieve his grandmother's antique diamond engagement ring. He ended the relationship standing in the exact same foyer where Helen had plotted her societal rise. He cited irreconcilable moral differences. He recognized that marrying into the Roberts family meant tethering his clean reputation to a sinking ship of endless deceit and potential felony charges. He walked out the door and never looked back. The Grand Society wedding evaporated into thin air. The lavish event Helen mortgaged her soul to construct dissolved instantly. The intricate web of lies she spun to elevate her social status ended up strangling her future. Lexi was left sitting alone in her childhood bedroom. Her closet held multiple custom-fitted bridal gowns, imported silk veils, and designer shoes. She possessed an entire wardrobe for a fairy tale that no longer existed. She spent months curating the perfect aesthetic for her online followers. Now she had the expensive white lace, but she lacked a groom. Her digital followers quickly noticed the sudden absence of wedding content. The comments shifted from congratulations to probing questions she could not answer. The Roberts family sat in the silent ruins of their own making. Their reputation was in ashes. Their credit was maxed out. Their golden child was weeping over an empty ring box. They lost the merger they so desperately craved because they alienated the only person capable of funding the venture. But the calendar continued to move forward relentlessly. The weekend of the planned ceremony was rapidly approaching. While Lexi stared at her useless dresses, I was preparing for a very different type of gathering. The luxury Park City resort was still booked, the exotic floral arrangements were already paid for, and my corporate charity gala was about to utilize every single asset my family forfeited. The stage was set for a spectacular reallocation of resources. The specific Saturday arrived. The local meteorologists predicted flawless conditions, and their forecasts were highly accurate. The temperature hovered at a crisp 70 degrees. Not a single gray cloud obscured the bright azure sky above the Wasatch Mountain Range. It was the exact pristine climate Helen prayed for during her 14-month planning phase. She frequently checked historical weather data to ensure her outdoor cocktail hour would feature the optimal sunset lighting. I drove up the winding canyon road toward the luxury resort. I did not carry a pastel bridesmaid dress zipped inside a protective garment bag. I wore a tailored emerald green evening gown. I carried a rigid silver clipboard. I functioned as the lead logistical director for my corporate firm's annual philanthropic event. The drive felt remarkably serene. The air rushing through my car vents smelled of pine needles and high-altitude freshness. Walking into the grand ballroom, I observed a breathtaking transformation. The space bore zero resemblance to a matrimonial celebration. There were no bridal arches draped in delicate tulle. There was no monogrammed dance floor waiting for a first dance. Instead, elegant silent auction tables lined the perimeter of the room. The floral designer repurposed the thousands of imported white orchids and pale roses I originally purchased. They now formed towering structural centerpieces, interspersed with subtle emerald accents, matching our corporate logo. The arrangements looked striking, sophisticated, and entirely professional. Julian, the executive chef, approached me holding a silver tasting tray. He looked remarkably relaxed. The tension of the bounced checks was a distant memory. He served the precise, bespoke menu I funded: herb-crusted venison and truffle risotto. But the porcelain plates were destined for pediatric surgeons, hospital administrators, and generous tech innovators. I watched the hospitality staff glide across the polished floor. The vendors retained their lucrative contracts, and the resort kept a strict schedule. The procurement director salvaged the assets and maximized their utility. The evening unfolded with mechanical precision. Guests arrived in tailored tuxedos and sparkling dresses, placing high bids on luxury vacation packages and private dining experiences. The keynote speeches highlighted groundbreaking medical research and future pediatric care initiatives. Nobody mentioned canceled nuptials or dramatic family feuds. I sat at a reserved table near the main stage, sipping sparkling water and analyzing the donation metrics scrolling across a digital display monitor. By 11 o'clock, the Hospital Foundation president stepped up to the microphone to announce the final tally. $1.2 million raised for the Children's Medical Facility. The crowd erupted into genuine applause. My non-refundable $25,000 deposit acted as the foundational cornerstone for a seven-figure philanthropic triumph. The contrast was deeply poetic. The funds originally earmarked to impress a single wealthy real estate family were now building a new neonatal intensive care wing. While the ballroom buzzed with celebration, a very different atmosphere blanketed my parents' suburban residence 40 miles south. The highly anticipated weekend arrived empty. There was no elaborate rehearsal dinner on Friday night. There was no lavish backyard barbecue scheduled for Sunday afternoon. There was just the crushing, suffocating quiet of a structural collapse. I imagined their sterile kitchen, the polished living room, the pristine manicured lawn, all maintaining a flawless exterior while the internal dynamic rotted away. Helen and Lexi spent over a year constructing a theatrical production. When the curtain fell before opening night, the actors were left wandering an empty stage without a script or an audience. They possessed zero backup plans because they never fathomed a reality where I stood my ground. Information always seeps through the cracks of a fractured social circle. My smartphone buzzed midway through the charity auction. A text message arrived from an old high school acquaintance who closely monitored local gossip. She provided the digital autopsy. Lexi, the former pageant queen who lived for online validation, deactivated every single social media platform. Her carefully curated influencer presence vanished into the digital ether. She could not endure the relentless probing questions from followers demanding wedding photographs she could never provide. The sponsors she tagged, the boutiques she praised, the countdown clocks she posted, all required a final payoff. She lacked the groom and the venue to deliver the content. The shame forced her into a severe digital retreat. The loud, confident influencer was permanently silenced by her own deceit. The updates regarding my mother were equally devastating. Helen officially ceased her daily visits to the neighborhood country club. She could not walk into the dining room and face the judgmental whispers of the other wealthy patrons. Evelyn Sterling effectively banished her from polite Utah society. The Sterling network was vast and unforgiving. Furthermore, Richard finally initiated a defensive maneuver. The passive enabler reached his breaking point regarding imminent financial ruin. According to the neighborhood grapevine, my father confiscated all of Helen's remaining credit cards. He locked down his pension accounts. The endless pipeline of imported skincare designer blazers and lavish luncheons ran dry. He recognized that his wife nearly sent herself to a federal penitentiary over a social climbing scheme. The trust between them fractured beyond repair. The elaborate Roberts family machine ground to a permanent halt. The gears seized, the engine died, and the operators panicked. The entire system crashed for one simple, undeniable reason. The designated workhorse simply stopped feeding the engine. I cut the funding, and their fictional reality starved to death. They built an empire on my paycheck while treating me like a peasant. The moment the capital vanished, the royalty lost their crowns. But surviving the collapse of your family of origin is only the first step of the journey. The true test involves what you choose to build in the vacant space left behind. You must decide how to navigate the ensuing silence. The final accounting was approaching, and the remaining balance required my immediate attention. 8 months have elapsed since the night I walked out of the Sterling dining room. The seasons transitioned across the Utah landscape. The dry heat of late summer surrendered to the crisp chill of autumn, and heavy winter snow eventually blanketed the Salt Lake Valley. Throughout that entire climatic cycle, my smartphone remained remarkably quiet. I have not received a single text message from Lexi. I have not listened to a frantic voicemail from Helen. Richard has not appeared on my front porch holding his faded baseball cap. Historically, this type of isolation terrified me. During my childhood and early adulthood, Helen weaponized the silent treatment. Whenever I failed to anticipate her needs or dared to prioritize my own schedule, she would freeze me out. She would withhold affection, refuse to answer direct questions, and pretend I was invisible until the crushing anxiety forced me to apologize. The quiet was a punitive measure designed to induce compliance. I used to view family estrangement as the ultimate failure. Now the silence operates differently. It is no longer a punishment. It is a protective shield. Waking up in a home devoid of incoming crises is the most peaceful sensation I have ever experienced. I pour my morning coffee without bracing for a financial emergency. I check my email without scanning for canceled vendor contracts. The profound stillness is the highest return on investment I have ever generated. The exact sum of $64,200 was merely the initial down payment on my freedom. I did not just save my bank account from a catastrophic wedding expenditure. I saved myself from a lifetime sentence of operating as a designated automated teller machine for people who fundamentally disliked my personality. When you cease funding a toxic dynamic, you quickly realize how much auxiliary capital you were bleeding on a monthly basis. I was no longer covering the unexpected automotive repairs for my sister. I stopped paying the hidden outstanding balances on my mother's credit cards. I retained my annual corporate bonuses instead of routing them toward country club dues to maintain a fictional suburban status. My net worth began to climb with steady, mechanical precision. The emotional recovery required a physical purge. One rainy Sunday afternoon, I walked into my home office. I retrieved the thick black leather portfolio from the bottom drawer of my desk. The binder served its ultimate purpose. The tribunal was over. The verdict was delivered. I did not need to carry the heavy evidence anymore. I plugged in the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting beneath my window. I flipped the power switch, listening to the low mechanical whine of the steel blades spinning to life. I opened the leather cover and removed the master venue contract. I fed the thick pages into the intake slot. The machine devoured the legal jargon, turning the stressful negotiations into illegible paper strips. I proceeded to the bank statements. I fed the chronological records of my cleared payments into the grinding gears. I watched the $64,000 worth of proof disintegrate. I shredded the printed transcript of Lex's fabricated internet broadcast. I shredded the high-resolution screenshots of my parents calling me a low-class embarrassment. I emptied the full plastic bin of confetti into a dark garbage bag. Next, I opened my laptop. I navigated to the encrypted hard drive. I located the master wedding spreadsheet. I did not archive the file. I did not save a backup copy to a cloud server. I dragged the digital icon directly into the trash bin and clicked empty. The intricate columns of data, the dates, the vendor names, the unbalanced ledgers vanished permanently. The audit was officially closed. With the financial hemorrhaging stopped and my savings aggressively rebuilt, I executed a new personal acquisition. I did not desire a sprawling, pristine property in a gated subdivision. I did not want marble columns or vaulted ceilings designed to intimidate houseguests. I wanted an impenetrable sanctuary. I purchased a modest A-frame cabin located high in the Wasatch Mountains. The structure was built from solid cedar planks and smooth river rock. It sits at the end of a long, winding dirt road flanked by towering evergreen trees. The property lacks a manicured lawn or a formal dining room. It features a heavy cast-iron wood-burning stove, a wraparound wooden deck, and expansive windows overlooking an undisturbed alpine valley. The mountain real estate required a substantial down payment. I signed the closing documents with a smooth, steady hand. The funds originated entirely from my own labor. I did not require a wealthy investor or a phantom contribution. When the real estate broker handed me the heavy brass key, I felt a distinct surge of pure ownership. Nobody else holds a copy of that key. Helen cannot drop by unannounced to critique the interior paint colors. Richard cannot show up demanding I mediate a dispute. Lexi cannot utilize the scenic backdrop for a sponsored social media upload. The cabin belongs exclusively to the woman who earned it. On weekends, I drive up the canyon road, leaving the congested city grid far behind. I unlock the sturdy wooden door, breathe in the scent of aged cedar, and light a fire in the iron stove. I sit on the deck, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. I watch the winter birds navigate the pine branches. I listen to the wind rustling through the dense forest. It is a solitary existence, but it is rich and deeply satisfying. I traded a crowded table of hostile performers for an empty room filled with unvarnished truth. If you are listening to this narrative and recognizing your own reflection, I need you to pause and absorb this reality. If you are the designated workhorse in your family, if you fix the broken logistics, cover the shortfalls, organize the schedules, and fund the emergencies while receiving nothing but harsh criticism, your situation is not a misunderstanding. Your profound loyalty is being actively weaponized. Toxic family systems rely on an inherent contradiction. They despise your independence because it highlights their own failures, yet they desperately require your resources to sustain their illusions. They will label you plain boring, chaotic, or low class to keep your self-esteem fractured. A fractured person is far easier to control. They convince you that paying the admission fee is the only way to retain your seat at the table. The moment you stop being financially or logistically useful, the facade will instantly drop. You will find out exactly how they truly view you. When that moment arrives, do not argue. Do not attempt to explain your value to people committed to misunderstanding your worth. Let them tell you exactly who they are. Look at their text messages. Watch their public broadcasts. Observe their quiet betrayals. Believe them the very first time. And then execute the most powerful logistical maneuver available to you. Cut the funding, shut down the bank, reallocate your time, your energy, and your capital back into your own future. Let their fictional empires starve while you build a quiet, solid sanctuary they can never access. Drop a comment below if you have ever been forced to financially cut off a toxic family member. What specific event served as your final straw? Tell the community how you reclaimed your resources. Do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who currently needs the courage to hit their own cancel button. The truth always balances the ledger, eventually. See you next time. The destruction of a family rarely occurs in a single afternoon. It does not begin with a canceled luxury wedding venue, a declined credit card, or a dramatic confrontation in a billionaire's dining room. The collapse begins decades earlier in the quiet, unseen moments of childhood. Looking back at the wreckage of the Roberts family, the true tragedy is not the loss of a $64,000 event or the evaporation of a high society merger. The profound tragedy lies in the fundamental failure of the parents. It is a harsh mirror held up to the darker side of American family dynamics, reflecting what happens when parents value the image of a child over the soul of a child. In American culture, we are frequently sold a highly specific blueprint for success. It involves the manicured suburban lawn, the membership at the local country club, the impressive collegiate credentials, and eventually, the picture-perfect wedding that signals a family has officially arrived. But within the traditional family structure, this pursuit of status can quietly rot the foundation of the home if honesty and fairness are sacrificed to maintain the facade. Helen and Richard Roberts did not set out to destroy their daughters. They simply lost the plot. They traded genuine emotional connection for societal leverage, and in doing so, they created a toxic ecosystem that was destined to fail. Consider how they compartmentalized their own children. They raised Lexi the golden child to function as an ornament. From the early days of local pageants to her eventual engagement to a real estate heir, Lexi was taught that her worth was tied entirely to her physical presentation and her ability to secure a wealthy partner. She was shielded from consequence and insulated from financial reality. On the surface, it looked like favoritism. In truth, it was a profound disservice. By protecting Lexi from accountability, Helen stripped her youngest daughter of resilience. When the illusion finally shattered, Lexi lacked the emotional tools to navigate the real world. She was left weeping in a childhood bedroom surrounded by useless silk, a victim of a mother who loved the idea of her more than the reality of her. On the other end of the spectrum was Ramona. The older sibling was assigned the role of the utility. While Lexi received applause, Ramona received invoices. In a healthy family structure, children are nurtured equally, their distinct personalities celebrated rather than exploited. But in a home lacking emotional awareness, children are assigned jobs. Ramona was penalized for her independence, deemed low class because she prioritized hard work over country club aesthetics. Yet her parents eagerly harvested the fruits of her labor. This is the ultimate failure of parental responsibility. A mother and father are meant to serve as a child's secure harbor, not their debt collector. When love becomes conditional on a child's utility, the family stops being a sanctuary and morphs into a business transaction. The role of the father in this dynamic cannot be overlooked. Traditional family structures often lean on the concept of the father as the steady protector. Richard abdicated this responsibility entirely. He chose the comfort of a quiet house over the safety of his oldest daughter. He watched his wife execute emotional cruelty and blatant financial deception, yet he merely stared at his shoes. His silence was a lesson in cowardice taught directly to his daughters. He demonstrated that maintaining a fragile peace is more important than standing up for what is right. Real family responsibility requires the courage to correct toxic behavior, even when that behavior originates from your own spouse. A father who refuses to defend his child from abuse becomes the secondary abuser. Honesty is the invisible mortar that holds a family together through generations. When Helen intercepted the $30,000 check intended for the wedding vendors, she committed a crime. But the deeper crime was the moral inheritance she passed down to Lexi. Children observe everything. They internalize the ethics modeled in the kitchen and the living room. Lexi watched her mother lie to the Sterlings, and consequently, Lexi learned to lie to her fiancé. The generational curse of deceit was handed down like a dark heirloom. Raising children with high emotional awareness means teaching them that a difficult truth is always more valuable than a comfortable lie. It means showing them that a pristine reputation built on falsehoods will eventually collapse, taking everyone down with it. If you are a parent currently raising children, or if you are a grown child trying to navigate the complex history of your own upbringing, this story serves as a stark warning. The metrics of a successful family are not found in the zip code you occupy or the grand events you host. The metrics are found in how your children treat one another when you are no longer in the room. They are found in the safety your children feel when they admit a mistake, knowing they will be met with guidance rather than rejection. True parenting is the grueling, unglamorous work of nurturing character, fostering equity, and loving your children for who they are, rather than what they can provide. If these themes resonate with the dynamics playing out in your own life, or if you are actively working to break the generational cycles of silence and exploitation, I invite you to join our community. Follow the channel Olivia Stories Revenge. We dive deep into the complicated, often painful realities of family dynamics, unraveling the hidden ledgers of human relationships, so you do not have to face these revelations alone. Subscribe and share your journey in the comments, because there is profound power in realizing you are not the only one carrying the weight. We all want to believe that the concept of family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred promise that transcends the transactional nature of the outside world. But the truth is far more delicate. A family is merely a garden. It grows exactly what you plant in the soil. You cannot plant seeds of conditional love, quiet resentment, and financial deceit and expect to harvest a legacy of loyalty. Eventually, the bill comes due. And as you sit at your own dining room table tonight, listening to the hum of your household, you might find your gaze drifting to the empty chairs. You might look at the spaces where certain people used to sit, and you might find yourself wondering, in the quiet depths of your own heart, whether the love you were given was ever truly a gift, or if it was simply an invoice waiting to be paid.